Hi, welcome to Plato's Cave, your speakeasy for ideas, where Tom and Dave show us how to think like the American founders. Grab a drink if you'd like. The conversation about saving our republic is about to begin.
Tom, it's election season. It's felt like election season for quite a while, but we are now in the home stretch. It's the last 30 days. I think we're inside of 30 days now, heading into the November election.
Dave, I have to make one comment quickly here. One of the many differences between our modern progressive world and the older constitutional United States is that it's basically always election season. Always election season. There's never a time when it's not election season.
I'm going to make a comparison that I hate making because I'm going to compare it to something I really like.
Yeah.
It kind of always feels like it's baseball season too. I mean, baseball season kind of spring training starts in February, late February, and now goes to November.
Yeah.
So it's always baseball season.
Yeah.
The worst part is we're getting hounded by election news and election information when we're in the middle of the baseball postseason, which I would so much rather pay attention to.
Yep.
And the World Series and Election Day are going to come right around the same time.
But we are within 30 days of an election, and we have been assured this is the most important election of our lifetime until the day after this election. And then the most important election of our lifetime will be the next election.
I think I heard that in 2020 when Donald Trump was running. And I think I heard that in 2018 when they had to get a majority of Democrats in Congress to check Donald Trump. And then I think I heard it in 2016 because what happens if Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump gets elected? Both, it's always the most important election. We've also seen a lot of debates happening recently. It's interesting. We talked about this the other day that do debates matter anymore? Do we even care about debates? Is this even part of the election process?
Well, I raised the bigger sort of historical question. Have they ever mattered? I mean, the most famous debates, certainly in American history, and arguably in world history, are the Lincoln-Douglas debates. It's hard to find a series of organized debates anywhere in the world that rival the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And the guy who put on the best show, Abraham Lincoln, made the best arguments, lost the election.
And we said might have even lost the subsequent election.
It could have
had the Democratic Party not been split at the time. So we have been asking ourselves, do debates matter? But if you ask people on Twitter, whoa, do debates matter? Debates, every debate. This person killed this person. Watch this person destroy this. The word choices are quite interesting.
Yeah.
And yet we have all these debates. We have all these questions. And what I'm noticing is we're finding more and more, especially on social media, we're finding, hey, all you Republicans or hey, all you Democrats, if you want to know how to answer this question, look at how this person answered it. They did a great job. Everybody should steal this answer. So who cares what you actually think? Who cares what you actually want to talk about? It's this person killed this person or this person. You have to use that language. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about it and I'm wondering, I'm realizing, I guess is the better way to put it. We're all talking about the same thing. Every debate, I don't care if it's Colorado, I don't care if it's Arizona, I don't care if it's Ohio. Every single debate has come down to the same things. Democrats want to talk about abortion. They want to talk about Dobbs and Roe versus Wade.
Nonstop. Every Democratic ad I've seen on TV, on the internet, it's all abortion all the time.
All the time. It's the only talking point they want to bring up. And we are unfortunately hearing a lot of people saying that's what's driving me to the polls on that side. On the other side, it's really two, sometimes three things. It's crime. It's inflation. And in certain circumstances, it's education. And really that's what our elections have boiled down to.
We're going to talk about some other things here today that our fellow citizens and the political class should be talking about. But I also want to offer just a mild, gentle suggestion for our listeners. To the degree that this is possible, I would love to see our audience start to reframe the whole discussion of abortion in this one simple way. It is always presented as a subject all about women and only women. This is only about women, as if women make babies on their own. They create the babies. Those babies are solely the property of a woman, and therefore right. That's the premise, is that this is all about women. When, so far as I know, and Dave, correct me if you know of any exceptions to this, every baby that's ever come about in the history of the human race, there's always been two people involved in that, a woman and a man. Let me be specific here for the progressives listening. It's been one human female and one human male that has contributed two X chromosomes,
and one person with an X and Y chromosome.
And their, how should we say this? Their materials have been mixed together in such a way to create a new human being with its own genetic code, its own chromosomes. And so here's the gentle reframing of this, right? Abortion isn't simply or solely or exclusively a subject for women to think about. It doesn't apply only to women, because every one of those babies has a father, and there might be some men out there who have an interest in the well-being, welfare, the life of their own baby.
Well, I was going to comment, it also doesn't matter whether or not you know the father. There are babies who exist out there who were created without the two people ever knowing each other. They were created through insemination and different processes like that.
Oh, my mind went somewhere totally different.
No.
My mind went in the late 80s and 90s. There were these daytime TV shows that became wildly popular because the hosts would offer what do you call the tests where you
the DNA test,
right, to decide who the father is.
The paternity test. That's what
paternity test. And it was always kind of just a sad spectacle to see when a woman swore it was this guy, and then he would take the paternity test and it wasn't that guy, it was some other guy.
Right. Well, modern technology, we've talked about the pros and cons of modern technology. Yep. Modern technology has allowed women to have children without ever having, you could potentially, as a woman, become pregnant without ever having sex with a man.
Correct.
Which is this whole other conversation.
Yeah. You still need that material.
Right. You still have to have that material. And I wasn't going to go down this today. I don't want to detract too far from the bigger conversation, but there was an interesting conversation that just came up that really has a lot of standing in the trans community and a lot of commentary underlying it to the trans community that just came out of the White House this week, I believe. It was either very late last week. President Biden and his team, and I'm going to always just say his team because we don't really know where it's all coming from.
Right.
But Joe Biden and his team put together their updated rules for the Selective Service.
Okay.
Which all of a sudden has become of interest, considering that Joe Biden just told us that we are on the brink of nuclear Armageddon.
Right.
And that Russia is going to nuke, is going to use a nuclear weapon, and we have to be worried. And all of a sudden now there's this real possibility of the draft, right? Selective Service is the draft.
Yeah.
And Joe Biden and his team have decided that doesn't matter if you identify as a woman. It doesn't matter if you have transitioned to a woman. If you were born a male, if you were born with that chromosome, you must enlist in the Selective Service. So forget what you identify as, forget everything else. We can recognize you as a woman in the Army or in the Navy or wherever you get drafted.
But you're going to be in there.
But you're going to be in there if you were born with a Y chromosome.
Right.
Which sort of just blows up the entire conversation, right?
Yeah.
And how do all of these people who say Joe Biden is the best friend of trans people justify that?
Well, it's an acknowledgement of reality, right? Even Joe Biden is acknowledging, that's a man.
Well,
in the end, it's a man. That's why you want to call yourself a woman and change your name and that's fine. But But the United States government knows you're really a man, which is why you're going in the army, whether you want to or not.
And this is also the effect of, it's nice to say things when you have an abundance. It almost plays into this whole supply and demand dichotomy, right? When you have things in an abundance, you can make little tweaks, you can make adjustments, you can do things. And that's how the natural economic order works. Apply that to people. The military enrollment is as down as it's ever been. People are not joining the military like they used to. They are desperate for people. And at the same time, they've thrown out tens of thousands of members of the military have been discharged for refusing to get the vaccine. So you have, we're going to throw you out, but we're going to create the selective service. So what happens to people who didn't get vaccinated, who are now getting drafted into the military?
My hunch is they'll just forcibly vaccinate them.
Well, that's going to cause a fairly significant problem among people. And
there's another interesting feature here, and I just want to briefly touch on it because it could take us down a deep philosophic rabbit hole. By making a distinction between males and females at all, the Biden administration has very likely unwittingly acknowledged what the founders called the natural law, that there are distinctions within nature. There are distinctions between different species, and there's distinctions within a species. Within the species of human beings, within Homo sapiens, there are males and there are females. And while they're all human beings and they all have the same human natural rights and things like that, there's a certain dignity to each human person that's equal. At the same time, there are differences, and these differences are rooted in our nature. They spring from our nature, and so the proper work by nature. This is nature suggesting these things. That the proper work for many males, is not the same thing as the proper work for many females. For example, giving birth to children. That's not, nature seems to indicate that's not the proper work of males, because males cannot give birth to children, whereas it does seem to be the proper work for women. Many women can give birth to babies by nature. And part of the sort of the postmodern progressive post-truth project is to ignore, destroy, jettison, get rid of any semblance of nature as some limitation on us, as setting some kind of parameter about what is true, what is right, what is good. Get rid of that. And here's the Biden administration reintroducing the natural law in the form of selective service requirements.
There are so many places we can go with this, and there are two. I didn't want to go down this. You want to go down this, but I can't skip this. First of all, there's a lawsuit that just got filed in California, and I don't think a lot of people have seen this, but there was a lawsuit filed in California by a handful of gay male couples, who think it is discriminatory that they can't birth children. We're not talking about adopting. They're talking about birthing children. And therefore, because they can't birth children, they want the state to make them equal by paying for the proper surgeries to allow a man to have a baby, which I don't even know that surgery exists to this point. But they are actually suing the state, saying, you owe us, you have to make us equal. And this goes back to that
doesn't even require a gay male couple, right? It's just any man. Any man could say, well, this isn't fair.
But this goes back to our very early conversations about what is natural human equality. What did the founders mean when they talked about human equality? Human equality, there are tall people, there are short people, there are smart people, there are not so smart people. There are fat people, there are skinny people, there are strong, there are weak. There are all these
inequalities.
Inherent inequalities. And the only way that we are guaranteed to be equal is that we are equally recognized as human beings with the capabilities that are unique to only human beings.
Each of us has the right to govern ourselves.
Because
each of us has a of a physical body. And you're right. And there's all these differences in our physical bodies. Compare physical human bodies. Oh, they vary greatly. But each body is home to a reasoning free mind that can make choices for the body in which it's housed.
And when you talk about self-government, we have a personal responsibility to self-govern ourselves. It's not even just the ability to.
That's right.
But we are equally expected to self-govern ourselves.
And by the way, that's not just an assertion you're making. We know this. This, for example, that obligation is the whole premise of the criminal code. Why do we have a criminal code? Why do we have laws against murder and theft and rape and arson and all these? Why do we have these laws? Because you're expected to govern yourself. You're supposed to control yourself and not go hurt other people, not steal other people's stuff.
So this recognition of that's what makes people equal versus this understanding that this lawsuit, to me at least, is absolutely absurd. To say that the government has to create this. Is egalitarian the right word?
Radical
egalitarian community of everybody having, everybody should be the same height. Everybody should be the same weight. Everybody should be the same.
Right.
Leads us down some dangerous paths. It also brings up, and again, we talked 5-6 weeks ago that I watched NFL football for the first time in a while, and I've kind of had it on and off throughout the season. The league it's really bad. The quality of football in the NFL is really, really horrific.
Well, here we're in Colorado, and our own Denver Broncos are certainly proving that not all high-priced quarterbacks are equal,
or high-priced coaches,
or high-priced coaches.
There's a lot of debate now. Yeah,
that's right.
The coaching or the players.
That's right.
All of that said, over the weekend, I did not watch much, but I did catch some of the highlights, and I did follow up on some of it on social media. And there were two instances, and one speaks to what we're talking about right now, about people not being equal in their characteristics, their traits, their strength, their everything else. And they both have to do with quarterbacks. So on Sunday, this past weekend, Tom Brady gets sacked by a guy for Atlanta.
Yeah.
And it's Tom Brady, and the referees decide you sacked him too hard. Now, they call roughing the passer.
Yep.
It gives Tampa Bay the win. Atlanta was going to get the ball back and have a chance to win the game.
Yep.
Instead, Tom Brady gets the first down and Tampa Bay wins.
By the way, a very similar thing happened on Monday night football.
That's where I was going next.
Oh, okay.
So this happens and everybody says, okay. Then the next night on Monday Night Football, you see the exact same thing happen. A player for the Kansas City Chiefs,
Chris Jones,
tackles Derek Carr, the quarterback, strips the ball in the process.
And it appeared to be a textbook tackle.
Correct.
Like the way you're supposed to. It wasn't helmet to helmet. The defensive lineman used one of his arms to kind of break his fall, so he didn't crush the quarterback when he landed. I mean, it was a textbook tackle.
So Chris Collinsworth, who's the announcer in the booth, I've never been the biggest fan of. I don't love him as an announcer. Even when I liked the NFL and was following football very closely, he was never my favorite. But it was either Collinsworth or it was a quarterback. No, sorry, it was not Collinsworth. It was Troy Aikman.
Yeah, Troy
Aikman who used to play for the Cowboys makes the comment and just says it. And a lot of people, it just kind of went right past them. They didn't catch it. They didn't notice it. But he says, I hope the competition committee, after the penalty with Brady yesterday and the penalty here today, I hope the competition committee goes back, reevaluates the rule, and decides to take the dresses off. And the Twitter world went crazy.
Oh, because there were dresses.
How dare you say that women aren't tough enough?
Right.
You're insinuating that women aren't tough enough. But what we know is a vast majority. There are a very, very small select group of women who are very, very big and strong.
Sure.
And could probably handle. I mean, if you or I went to tackle them, they'd probably laugh, right? I mean,
right.
That's fine. And I totally get that. I'm not saying this applies to all women.
Sure.
But for the most part, we do know that naturally women are less they can take less of a beating.
Well, we know this. We know this, Dave. When an NFL team fields players, puts players out on the field, what's the purpose of those players? What do they want to do? They want to win.
They want to beat up on each other. They want to hurt each other.
Well, but ultimately they want to win, right?
Sure.
I mean, victory in the game. And if you win enough games, you get to go to the playoffs. And if you win through the playoffs, hopefully you get to win a Super Bowl. That's what it's all about, is winning. And so I just point this out. If there was a female quarterback who was so good that they could take a team to many victories and a Super Bowl victory, wouldn't an NFL team hire that person?
Yes. Yes.
Why is there? Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not an expert on the NFL. I believe the number of female quarterbacks is 0.
0.
I believe the number of female linebackers is 0. I think the number of running backs is. In fact, I think the number of players in the NFL is female players is 0. Now, why is that? Is it because they're all misogynistic and they hate women?
No.
Or is it because there is no woman out there who is fast and strong and athletic enough to compete at that level in the NFL?
That's exactly it. And there are a very, very small few female kickers that have existed in college football.
Right.
Not one of them has ever made it to the NFL.
Right.
Generally because at some point a kicker is going to be expected to tackle a big, strong running back or kick returner.
Right.
And it's not going to happen. It's just the reality of human nature. It's the reality of the human characteristic. So we talk about all of this stuff that's been going on in these circumstances. And we just talked about Biden and the selective service and how it's led to all these conversations about men and women. And yet this election that we have coming up is only about 2, 3, maybe 4 things.
Yeah. Abortion. Democrats talk about abortion and Republicans talk about crime, which is a problem.
Yep.
It's a problem, but they really boil down to crime and inflation for the most part. Once in a while, they'll mention schools and education, but mainly crime and inflation. So, and so I guess you could look at that in sort of a positive light, say that, well, they've really distilled it down to the important things. But at the same time, you could say they're ignoring all kinds of other issues or related subjects because they're just trying to get their little talking points in over what the pollsters tell them voters will resonate with.
Or what they can actually make solid arguments about and feel comfortable about and convince a voter that this is something that we can impact immediately. And that's what elections have really become about.
Yeah.
And to me, we're overlooking some of the bigger long-term questions that we've talked about this time and time again. And I just don't think we can ever stop. And that is the progressives, when the progressive movement started, nobody was sitting there. You've made this point to me several times off camera. Nobody was sitting there saying, let's go form a think tank and create an advocacy organization that's going to go try to convince a bunch of bureaucrats or a bunch of elected officials to pass a law to do this. They said, no, we're going to take a long-term approach. We're going to start to influence X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
And nobody's going to see it coming until it's too late. And we've seen that with a lot of colleges and universities, and people are upset with the entire education system now because of what John Dewey did 130 years ago, 125 years ago. And there's something else that we're starting to see come to fruition that I don't think anybody's talking about yet that really scares me. And we're seeing a handful of mostly academic people talking about it. And that is the militarization of the bureaucratic class.
Before you turn to that, I just want to make a quick comment on the whole subject of schools and Dewey. And this is one of the talking points some Republicans throw out here in this campaign season, the topic of education. And yet even there, the subject has been boiled down. Progressives will say, well, we care about education, and that means we need more money, more money. Raise taxes, more money, even though spending on education for the last 50 years, literally since 1970, spending's been going up per pupil. We can measure these things. And meanwhile, performance has been stagnant at best. And in many cases, like reading scores has actually gone down. Math scores has actually gone down. And this gets complicated when you dig into it because, while take something like race and racism. Oh, there's a history of that in America, and it has been a problem, but it's not the only problem. And in many ways, it's not even the biggest problem. There are schools in America where there are subcultures, often, but not always, often that run along skin color lines,
right?
Where you have groups of kids who mock and ridicule those who want to learn how to read well, speak well, write well, think well. A friend of mine, Joseph Phillips, he's a Hollywood guy. He's one of the sort of sane, rational people in Hollywood. And he wrote a book years ago. I actually reviewed it when it was still in manuscript form. And the title of his book was He Talked Like a White Boy.
Right.
And that wasn't a typo, or that he talked like a white boy, because that what was his black friends would say to him. Joseph Phillips has dark skin, and he wanted to do well in English class, and he wanted to do well in his math classes. And there were he would be mocked and ridiculed, viewed as sort of a cast out from the popular group, because learning to communicate well, to articulate your thoughts well, to think well, was seen as somehow selling out, as somehow not being your authentic self. And when we look at education, like, right, how do we account for that? That's not a failure so much of a particular school.
Right.
It's not even a failure of the education system. If you have kids who think it's stupid to learn, we don't want to learn. Okay, well, then you're probably not going to learn. If you really don't want to learn, you're probably not. And that might seem really cool when you're 15, but when you're 25 or 35 or 45 and you can't think well and you can't communicate well, it's not going to be very cool at all.
But what if that's the pervasive culture, not just for kids? I mean, if you really think about it, what if you're in a school of mostly kids with darker skin, and mostly teachers with darker skin, and remember, there's a lot of teachers out there who are in their early 20s, right? They're recently out of college, and we know where people are in their early to mid 20s from a maturity level standpoint,
right?
We were not all there ourselves.
Not very.
Right. And we all know those people.
Yeah.
If the teachers aren't encouraging that either, then you really start to get into this concern of, well, the teachers are saying, I don't think you're not being committed to your culture if we're teaching you how to learn how to read and write and do math. If we want to be true to our culture, we need to teach you about sex. We need to teach you about slavery. We need to teach you the 1619 Project.
Well, I'm persuaded. I'm curious what our listeners think. I'm persuaded that many schools and circles of education bureaucrats have honestly just given up trying to argue that they can teach children how to read and write and do arithmetic, because they've proven now for 5 decades they can't, even with a lot more money, they can't. And so they've just given up and said, let's just talk to them about sex. It's easier. Let's just get a group of, 4th graders or 6th graders or 8th graders and ask them, what do they feel about sex and what turns them on? And do they think they're boys or girls or both, or right? Because they can't teach them how to read and write. Yeah. So they teach them that. And then there's this other piece that you're drawing upon. I mean, combined together, human phenomena are always complex. There are always all kinds of things interacting with each other. So take this notion of cultural identity. You want to be part of whether it's a Black culture or a Latino culture or whatever the culture is. And somehow within that culture, there's this push against education. To be educated, to speak well, is not to be an authentic member of your culture. So that's a phenomenon going on. Now mix into that the kind of nihilism, the philosophic denial of truth. There is no truth. It's just your opinion about everything. But mix those things together And imagine some 16-year-old kid sitting in class and a teacher's trying to explain, here's what adjectives are, and here's what adverbs are, and here's how to use them, and here's why you don't end a sentence in a preposition, right? And the basic rules
Right.
of the language. Here's how to use it well. And this kid's sitting there thinking, well, that's not how people around me talk, so that's not my culture. And I've already been told there is no truth. So why do I have to use an adjective that way or an adverb that way? I'll use them any way I feel like using. The problem is, if we don't even have some agreed upon ways to use our language, if I'm making up the way I use a language, whether it's English or any other language, and I just start speaking or writing in ways you don't recognize because I'm not following I'm not using the language the same way you use it, Dave, then you're not going to understand what I'm saying or writing. I mean, how could you, right? And so what really happens is it breaks down, it drives us apart. It doesn't bring us together.
Well, and that seems to be the direction that many progressives are going. And I've been doing a lot of reading on this lately and listening to a lot of podcasts on this lately. From some of the really preeminent, I don't want to say young because they're my age, maybe a little older, but younger, preeminent Black thinkers out there. Some are professors at Harvard and Columbia and Yale, and they're out there and they're talking about questioning why are we trying to resegregate society and this fear of resegregating society. And it's interesting that we were talking about football earlier, and you even brought up Russell Wilson, the Broncos quarterback.
Right.
For a lot of people don't remember.
I didn't actually mention his name.
I'm going to mention his name.
I just said
I'm going to mention his name because I want to talk about, there was a segregated locker room in Seattle when he was there. And this was a really interesting, we might have talked about this on a podcast in the past. Richard Sherman, who is a Stanford educated cornerback or former cornerback. He was an all-pro. He was a great football player. And he's now on the Thursday night broadcast. Right. So he was one of the commentators at halftime and pregame and postgame of the Broncos game last Thursday night. And Richard Sherman and Russell Wilson were both played for Seattle at the same time. And at one point, Richard Sherman said to the media, not to Russell Wilson, but to the media, I don't socialize with Russell Wilson. I don't like Russell Wilson. He's not Black enough. And actually used that language. He's not Black enough. And if you listen to the way Richard Sherman is approaching the conversation, look, he is a well-spoken, very, very articulate young man, but he speaks in a certain way that he embraces a certain approach. And he didn't think that Russell Wilson, he thought Russell Wilson was a white boy, the same way Joseph Phillips was called that. And it's amazing that we have this issue today in education of just this, we need to resegregate.
Well, and here I want to offer just an idea of how things could be. It's just, let's use our imagination here for a minute. Imagine a nation of people from all different ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. They look different. They have different color skin. They're related to people in different parts of the world, but they're all Americans. They're all citizens of the United States. And they say, one thing we need is a common language. The obvious candidate would be the English language, simply because it's so pervasive. It's spoken by more people in the United States than any other language. So let's start there. And we say, here's the English language. Here's the way you use it. Everyone should know this. Yes, we welcome people from different backgrounds and different skin colors and everything. But here's how to use it. Here's what a noun is, and here's what a verb is, right? And here's how these things go together, and here's how you form a sentence and a paragraph, so that we can communicate more clearly with each other and actually understand each other better. And at the same time, as we're communicating, let's communicate about a set of ideas and principles that we share in common as fellow citizens. What this country was founded to be. We should all agree on things like equal protection of the laws for equal individual rights and things like that. Now, we could have this tapestry of all kinds of racial diversity and ethnic diversity and cultural diversity. We get all these differences and still have some things in common, like a common language and how to use it, and some common knowledge and some common ideas and common principles. We could have those things. That's a very different path that I'm describing than what's going on in most of our schools.
One of the underlying things there is a common agreement on virtue, right? I mean, we talk all the time about the Constitution. The very idea of our founding is that Americans act with virtue. You have to, in order to have a free society, a self-governing society, human beings have to explore and understand what it is to be virtuous. And I don't know that we have that anymore. That we have this common drive to have virtue. So
I would go farther. There's not even an agreement on what virtue means.
Well, that's true.
What virtue is. It's one of the reasons I've been an advocate of Aristotle's little book, his Nicomachean Ethics. It's a thin book. It's not very long. It's beautifully assembled. And one of the things he does is he marches through the virtues based on human nature. This isn't Greek virtue. He was an Athenian. He was an ancient Greek, but this isn't virtue for Greeks or virtue for any particular group of people. He looks at human phenomena such as courage versus cowardice. Anybody of any color can be a coward, and they can be courageous, right? They can make a choice to be courageous. And so he parses out what is courage and how does it differ from cowardice, and why is it wrong when people who love you and they're counting on you to protect them and you abandon them and you let them get hurt? It doesn't matter what color skin someone is, right? Like we should all agree that's a bad thing. That's shameful to be a coward when the people you love are counting on you to stand up for them. Well, and so the bigger idea here is we need to recover some basic common definitions of virtue. Like what constitutes virtue? Another example, right? Stealing. Can we all agree? Nobody. It doesn't matter what your cultural background is. No one of us should be stealing what belongs to someone else.
And there's no justification for it.
No,
right?
No.
You can't say, I can't say, well, I'm Jewish and my family was affected by the Holocaust, so I have a right to go steal from a German.
Right.
No, that's their property.
It was wrong that the Germans stole from Jews. They stole everything, including their lives.
Right.
Stole all. So we can denounce that as wrong, but that doesn't give someone today a license to go do more stealing, right? It's like,
exactly.
Stop the bad behavior. So
here's the bigger question for me, and this is where I'm getting stuck in our ongoing conversation over the last several weeks, and I don't know that there's an answer, but I would love to hear what some of our listeners think and what some of our members think. Here's where I get stuck: is we have a culture. We have been debating, are we a democratic society? Are we a constitutional republic? Have we become an oligarchy? Are we something completely unrecognizable? Do we need to start coming up with new words and definitions for what we've become and decide, do we want to continue down this road? And there's a lot of people out there who would probably say, yeah, we are heading in a positive direction. I don't think a lot would agree, but I think there's a significant portion of the population that would say, you know what, I understand things are getting more expensive and there's more crime but there's a lot of things in the United States that are heading in a really good direction. And I want to keep building that bureaucracy, and I want to keep pushing towards Marxism and socialism, because that's going to get us to where we need to be.
Yeah.
And as we discuss those things, did the founders create a situation? Did they design this? It's an experiment, right? We are living in the first ever regime founded on an idea. It was an experiment. We have no idea if this could work or not. Did they design something that could work, considering the fact that we seem to consistently try to move in more of a situation where people are not treated equally under the law?
Right.
We had slavery, we got past slavery, we've had all of these things. And it seems like just about every time a political candidate has tried to stand up and do something about it, Lincoln was lucky. I said this earlier. I've said this in Lincoln got lucky. Lincoln was the right guy at the right time, but Lincoln got lucky that the Democratic Party was split. He would not have gotten elected. I've been reading Barry Goldwater's book, The Conscience of a Conservative. Barry Goldwater might have been that next guy, right? We're talking about 100 years after Lincoln, and he might have been that next guy. He didn't get elected. And those who did, who could even come close to that, certainly had to take into consideration, what does it take to get elected and stay in office, as opposed to what do I need to do to save our constitutional republic?
Right.
And I'm wondering if we're too far down the road to go back, or was this designed in a way to even have this ongoing? Because can you get elected? Can you exist in a functioning republic that elects democratically?
Yeah.
It's for lack of a better word, it's leaders. You're raising fundamental questions, which is why there's no easy, simple answer. And certainly when you look back at the 60s, the 1960s, it's very illuminating the fact that Barry Goldwater could get no traction. Right.
But Barry Goldwater was a very thoughtful, very intelligent man. So it's one of the most scurrilous, unwarranted, undeserved labels that he's been called a racist. There wasn't a racist bone in Barry Goldwater's body. He was a constitutionalist. He wanted equal protection for equal rights, and he couldn't get any traction. You know who could? Richard Nixon.
Right.
Richard Nixon could get elected. Richard Nixon was far less concerned about, saving a constitutional. Barry Goldwater was. Like he thought this: if we don't preserve this experiment in Republican self-government, then it's probably hopeless anywhere. Because if it doesn't work here, where will it work? Your comments also raise, some basic. These are really almost primordial facts about life. Citizens would do well to think this through. In any kind of political environment, and this is probably true in virtually any kind of environment, whether it's political or not, there really are two basic options. Try to change something, or try to preserve what you have, the way things are. Preserve the status quo, or make a change.
Sure.
Now, if you're for making a change, the premise would be, well, the change is an improvement. I mean, whether it's change or preserving the status quo, all hinges on what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. If you want to change, well, then that's because you think the change is going to be a change for the better, for the good. It's going to get you closer to what's good. If you say, no, let's keep what we have, let's protect the status quo, it's because you're worried a change will be for the worse. And you would rather keep what you have, right, than go somewhere worse. The ability to think in those kinds of moral categories, what is better and what is worse, right? Those very terms are meaningless without a concept of the good. Right. You have to have some idea of what's good, what's right, to know what's better and what's worse, right? Better means it's closer to the good. Worse means you're moving farther away. So I watch a little NFL football, and I notice all these players now they have their little political and cultural slogans on the back of their helmets. And one of the popular ones is inspire change. So there's this premise there. Change by definition is good, but change isn't necessarily good. Change for the worse.
Right.
I don't want that. I don't want to inspire change for the worse. I would like to inspire improvement. That's change for the better. But we seem to have lost the ability to think in these kinds of terms. So a phrase like change, a word like change, is bandied about out there in the political realm, and people cheer for it. Yeah, change. Well, change to what? What are you changing to? If we're heading down the direction of Maoist China, if that's what we're changing into, or we're changing to Lenin's, Soviet Union, or Mussolini's Italy, or Hitler's Germany, I don't want to change in that way. Correct. I would rather just keep what we have. If those are my choices, keep what we have or make that change. And it makes it really, really difficult. There's the old cliche, the grass is always greener on the other side. There's a lot of truth to it. There's a lot of truth that no matter how good things are here, no matter how good our lives are, we can have great houses and cars and relationships and freedom. And there's always this view of, I bet things would be there. The grass is greener on the other side. If we could just make things different than what they are, it will necessarily be better. And this is one of the parts of the Founders Project that's very rarely discussed. And yet it's huge. It's gigantic. It's if you're looking for it, you can't help but notice it when you read the literature of the founders. And that was this, let's moderate our expectations. If we expect paradise, we're going to end up with tyranny. We're not going to get paradise. We're going to end up with tyranny. So let's not expect paradise. Let's be humble and moderate and lower our expectations. If we can create a situation here in the United States where we're relatively secure in our rights and our liberty and our property, and we can live our lives the way we want to live and build the relationships with the people we care about, that's about as good as it's going to get. If you try to make it better than that, if you try to say, hey, free housing and free healthcare for everyone, you're going to end up with gulags, and you're going to end up with soldiers with machine guns telling people they got to go work in the rice fields. And you're just going to end up with all this ugly violence.
Well, and then the other problem with it is we've seen this since probably the elections in the 1820s, 24 and 28 with Andrew Jackson.
Yeah.
We can't talk anymore about things like you're talking about. We can't have our political debates. We started this conversation talking about the debates that are leading up to this election. Nobody's sitting there and talking about, let's talk about what America should be. Let's talk about what the idea of America is. Instead, they're talking about, should we have abortion or not? Should we make a law against abortion or not? Is abortion a right or not? And there's this huge fight that, well, if it's a law, it must be a right, which a whole other conversation for another time. And then on the other side of it, you have this question of, you have people talking about, how do we lower crime? How do we lower inflation? How do we elect people who are going to do those things for us? Because at the end of the day, the government is what's causing inflation because they're not letting the market operate. And we're debating who in the government is going to fix inflation rather than letting the market fix itself. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about, I can't think of post the founding era of a single president who was elected, maybe Calvin Coolidge, maybe, but a single president who was elected by actually saying, we need to talk about the American idea. We need to talk about what this country is supposed to be, because even Lincoln, and I'm going to keep going back to this. We cannot forget how lucky we are to have gotten Lincoln. It didn't get a majority of votes. He didn't get 40% of the vote.
Right.
Americans have not chosen to elect a president who has said, my goal is to return America or to define America this way and to make sure we accomplish the ideas of the founding.
You might be right in pointing to Coolidge. There are several collections of his speeches, and he talked at length about those ideas of the founding and what they mean today. And let me connect that to what you were just saying. We have a political class out there fighting, whether they feel, and I'm using this word very purposefully, whether they feel women have a right to abortion or they feel they don't have a right. The more fundamental discussion we should be having, what is a right?
Yeah.
What is a right? What makes something a right? Is it just what I feel is a right? Or is there a concept of things we have rightful claims to? And what do we have a rightful claim to? And that would point us back to those ideas of the founding, that idea of a free society. Like I said, the other direction is promises of utopia. Think of everything you could possibly want, everything you need, and those in government promise it to you. And then that means they have to start controlling others to give it to you, because those in government, they don't produce all. They don't produce food and houses and healthcare. So now all of a sudden you need soldiers and bureaucrats with guns pointing them at people saying you're going to go provide healthcare for Dave, and you over there, you're going to build a house for Dave, and you're going to go,
teach.
You're going to teach Dave, right. That's what, if I'm the government and I'm promising all these things to you and saying you're entitled to them, then I have to control a lot of people. And so what you notice is regimes that promise paradise tend to be heavily armed regimes. The government is heavily armed, not the citizens. In fact, these two things work in opposite directions. The more that a government wants to boss around citizens, those in government become heavily armed, and they do their best to take away the arms and weapons of the citizens. And, here's one of the truly frightening things. There's now a trend that stretches across decades, right here in the United States, of our own government. And I'm not talking about the military. Set aside the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, set that aside. I'm talking about things like the Smithsonian Institute. That's a museum.
Yes.
And the Smithsonian Institute buys thousands of weapons, military grade weapons, millions of rounds of ammunition. Dave, tell me, what do you think the Small Business Administration does?
What are they
supposed to do?
I don't really know.
When people hear Small Business Administration, what do they think?
The general idea is that they're going to help small businesses succeed.
Yeah, they're going to give loans to businesses that banks won't, because the banks can't go tax the American people. But
loans and resources.
You know what they spend billions of dollars on?
Ammunition.
Yes. And here's this trend of these domestic bureaucratic agencies becoming armies unto themselves. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions I raise is, what are they preparing for? That word prepper has become kind of a pejorative, it's a term you say with sort of a sneer. Many of our progressive friends will make fun. They'll mock preppers. Someone who maybe stores up some water, food in their basement, maybe stores up some extra ammunition and some guns because they don't know what's going to happen in the future. We make fun of them. And so I've gotten to the point, in fact, I have a chapter on this in my book on the swamp. If we should be worried about our neighbor who has some extra food and extra water, if that's a concern, then what about all these bureaucratic agencies that are buying millions and in some cases billions of rounds of ammunition? This is military grade ammunition and weapons. What are they prepping for? What do they think's coming?
There's an analogy there, or there's a symmetry to that with the stock market. Mm-hmm. A lot of traders will look at specifically what certain people, if you have certain access to certain information, you have to make all of your trades publicly known at all times,
right?
Because it's an unfair advantage. Even a Paul Pelosi is supposed to make all of his trades publicly known. Right. Whether he should be even allowed to trade is
right.
We've had that conversation. But if you're a CEO, if you're Elon Musk, you have, for example, you have an obligation to make people aware before you trade. You have an obligation under federal law to make people aware that I am going to be selling shares of my stock, or I'm going to be buying shares of my stock at this price at this time, because he has an unfair advantage of knowing things, and people react accordingly. People will buy stock in Tesla or sell stock in Tesla based on what the CEO of Tesla is doing.
Right.
People take the same cues from the government. When the government is going out and out of nowhere buying billions of rounds of ammunition, maybe I should be too.
Right.
When the government just recently, we saw the government went out and from Pfizer, maybe, I don't remember which drug company, they bought a drug that is supposed to treat the immediate effects of radiation from a nuclear bomb.
Right.
They spent hundreds of millions or tens of millions of dollars on this drug that's being dispersed to bureaucrats throughout the government. They're not for American people. They're for bureaucrats who work for the government. Should we be taking a cue from the government in that situation, saying, well, maybe I need to go have that on hand as well?
Right.
It's interesting to observe and to think about, what is the government actually doing as they are militarizing the bureaucracy rather than continuing to build the military. We're watching, was talking about this earlier, we're watching the shrinking of our military. And today we now have more bureaucrats with guns than we have Marines with guns.
Let that sink in. More unelected bureaucrats with guns, many of which are military grade weaponry,
right,
than there are United States Marines.
Notice we didn't say assault rifles. Right. We said military grade weaponry.
Right.
Right. There's no conversation here about what's an assault rifle. Right. That's the joke conversation. Yep. That's the Dianne Feinstein holding up this gun's scary and this one's not. And we all know how much of a joke that is. But these are bureaucrats that we didn't elect, that impose rules and regulations on us, that fine us, that require us to act in a certain way.
And here's the thing. When they're asked, many of these agencies just ignore it. They just won't comment. But occasionally they do. And when they do, we have records of these things. They will say, well, we have to enforce our own regulations. And there are people out there trying to cheat our system. When we offer billions or trillions of dollars in entitlements, the people try to steal and engage in fraud and get things they're not entitled to. And so we have to go enforce these things and punish these people. And what you quickly realize is the whole idea of separation of powers just completely breaks down, right? Rather than a legislative branch that passes laws and an executive branch that enforces laws and a judicial branch that judges if laws have been. No. These agencies, they're everything. They're mini legislatures. They issue regulations that have the power of law. They are their own executors. They execute their regulations and they enforce them at the barrel of a gun, quite literally. And if they think you're, trying to rip them off or you're not in compliance with them or something, they'll arrest you. They'll come arrest you for not obeying their regulations, and they'll hold a hearing, an administrative hearing, and so they're the judge too.
Right. So that leaves us with a big question, and I think we leave this on this question: is the American idea something that can be saved? This is a huge question, a huge conversation. But can it be saved? And if so, how do we save it? Is it saved through electing the right people? If it is saved through electing the right people, should those people be talking about rising crime and education and inflation?
Right.
Or should we be talking about bigger issues like the fact of the militarization of a bureaucratic unelected class? Should we just continue to allow elections to happen the way they are? Because that seems to be the only people who can get elected are the people who are talking about the issues of the moment, what seems like the most pressing issues of the moment, in a process of, are we going to ever go create something that is different than, okay, we're going to put money into some advocacy group and that advocacy group is going to go advocate for the election of this person. And that's how we're going to save the republic. I think after 8 decades, it's pretty obvious that's not going to work. And at what point are we going to do something differently? At what point are we going to take that next step and say, if we believe in the ideas of the republic, people must start learning what it is to be virtuous. People must start learning how to communicate with each other. It needs to be okay to talk to the American public about deeper ideas and deeper thinking and be able to get elected on those topics. And how do you work towards that end goal rather than we just want to get somebody elected who's going to help with inflation?
They have to speak better, act better, and make better choices. And in the end, right, that's all part of trying to be defenders of the American idea. It's what no sumos custodes really means.
And I'm waiting for somebody to step up and say, or groups of people to step up and say, we need to defend this. We need to guard this. This was right. This was good. And it's not just yay America, yay patriotism, yay flag. It goes beyond that. It takes work. To be a free self-governing society takes work. And we as Americans have to start being willing to put that time and effort in.
Here's the good news, Dave. There are people standing up and saying that. We are, which is why more people should be listening to us each week.
We are. And I'm starting to find others. And I hope, and I'm going to continue to keep trying to share those. And we should all hope we can all start finding ways to get that message out. Until next time.
No sumos custodes.